man, as a founders, you need to get your hand dirty. You need to get to hear and speak to customers directly. I think a lot of founders too early want to build a team, want to set up a marketing team, wants to get sales guys to take care of it. And for us, that has become very a strength because it's enabled us to really stay close, to hear what works, what doesn't. And eventually, once you get these 50, 100 first customers and you hear from them, after it's much easier, then you can start automating things.
This is the case for me and the case for a lot of Moroccan entrepreneurs or African entrepreneurs. When you offer a service to clients around the world, you get stuck at that problem of how can I get paid from these clients? And usually a wire transfer is one of the biggest red flags for these clients. Their banks are going to be asking them questions. And so they prefer to pay through payment links like Stripe, for example. I was like, okay, let me do Stripe. And then you realize that your country is not supported by these payment processors.
Moroccans are built this way. They always find ways to get something done, right? They're very practical. And so if you tell them you can't do that, they'll find a way, as you said, to if they have to open a subsidiary somewhere in the UK, use crypto, they're gonna find a way to get that money in and out of somehow, right? So which work for them, but essentially it's a headache, it's an admin headache, essentially you always have fees down the line. And this is where we realized that even payment links became a major hook for us, meaning that great way for people to get into the platform. People trusted us because of our background, but not the legitimacy to build something in Morocco or in South Africa, right? They're like, well, what do you know about South Africa? Well, for us, it was exactly, we're looking at it with fresh eyes.
Germain, thank you so much for being here today with me in the podcast. I'm super excited. And just to get started, if someone doesn't know you, how would you introduce yourself?
No, Yassine, look, same here. Very, very keen to be here and really appreciate you. Also one of our first customers and you left a very positive review. So that's the least I can do. And I'm always excited to talk with people that I think you and I chatted also after you open up the account around, the solutions that you have and so on. So it's always a pleasure. About me, I'm Germain Bahri. I'm half Belgian, half Tunisian. And I'm the co-founder and I lead the growth at Zazu, which is a 100% online professional accounts, financial accounts where a lot of entrepreneurs, freelancers, auto-entrepreneurs and SMEs in Morocco can typically better manage their finance. And I'm based here in Casa, in Morocco, for the time being.
Amazing. How long have you been in Casa?
I've lost track of time, to be honest. As entrepreneurs, days feels like weeks. Sometimes weeks feel like days. I think it's been at least 6 months, I would say. 6 intense months. Yeah.
Amazing. And why did you go for Fintech? What inspired you to start Zazu? Can you also explain what Zazu does?
Yeah, no, sure. Actually, as you're asking the question, I'm wondering actually, why did I go for Fintech? So my background was in finance, right? What is your background? Are you in finance as well?
No, I'm in marketing.
Marketing, okay. Yeah, so the traditional, core business classes was always finance, marketing, business. And, my vocation, I wanted to be like a financial advisor, work for the private banks, which I did at the very beginning of my career. And in the meantime, it was the early days of, there was crypto and Bitcoin back in 2015, 16, at least when I was a student. That was that sort of bubble coming out on one hand. On the other hand, it was the early days of the likes of Revolut, Monzo. Don't know if you know these guys also in the UK and in Europe, right? It was these new guys were coming up, like Wise, TransferWise was there. I was like, what is this new revolution cooking, right? There was something in the air. It was two things, I think. I was very curious. So I asked a lot of the people I worked with at the bank, like senior banking executives when I would go to lunch or for coffee. I said, like, how do you see the industry evolving? I treated them as mentors. And they started hinting towards, look, there are new technology coming up, try to think about these things. On one side, on the other side, I had studied in San Francisco, and I had seen sort of the impact that technology had on an industry. So it was in the back of my mind. And then I did a trip in London where I had the chance to meet, to visit a co-working space. Actually, it was an accelerator called Level 39, which typically is a bit the YC. Of a lot of fintechs. There was the beginning of Revolut. There was eToro. Maybe you know these guys, and that was really a sort of a revelation moment for me when I was like, man, I need to jump on this wave. I left UBS. I left I left all of this, and I ended up just being part of the early days of fintech. And a few years later, that has become my career. I've worked for some of the early pioneers in digital banking, in fintech, in whatever, expense management. And after some years, I was like, look, there's a lot of things that I've learned. I can either sell it, right, as a consultant or be part of, more of them, or I can possibly do something on my own, I have nothing to lose. And, in the meantime, Europe was becoming a bit, not boring, but very redundant. There was more and more Revolux likes coming out and so on. So started looking at emerging markets, and this is where I was like, Zazu, that's it,
I'm curious, what's the name? Where does the name Zazu come from?
Does it come from? Yeah. So typically, it's never when you talk about if I had to remember the days of coming up with the logo, with the brands. This is actually almost the toughest part of. I'm not going to say the toughest part. It's the most creative one, but it's the most. It's not a science at the end of the day, right? You can like something, your co-founder may not like it, and then a customer. But typically, Zazu meant in Swahili, which is you may know, which is a local language in South Africa, which is our first market, meant movement. Yeah, so there was a bit of a wing to that, right? Of trying to have something that feels local, but also something that feels familiar in the sense that reminded us of a bit the Lion King, and so not that we wanted to play on. I don't know if you remember that character called Zazu in the Lion King.
Oh yeah,
that's annoying but wise bird. That tells you what's where you need to go and what you need to pay attention to. So there was a bit of that, and we tested it, to be honest, with a few customers in South Africa, and it seems that it resonated well. In Morocco, people sometimes have a harder time to pronounce it because I think the U may not exist, like they say Zuzu or Zazu, but Zazu exactly. This is Zazu, but it's I think it seems to resonate quite okay for now.
And for the products that you guys offer at Zazu, what kind of products do you offer? And I know that you guys work mostly with businesses and business owners, right?
Exactly. Actually, only business owners, in the sense that, the entrepreneur account, as you know, you need to either be an auto-entrepreneur, right, to have that certificate, or have a SARLO, SARL, or some types of business incorporation. That is the one and only focus that we want to have, right? We think that there are already a lot of solutions on B2C. I think there's a few banks have, Chari have launched their own, digital banks. Revolut is coming out. It's quite busy already. But when you look at, business banking, or at least anything when it comes to managing your finances for business owners, is quite limited. So especially, and this is where the products that we are after at Zazu look like, typically is it's a full digital account opening, right? So you have a professional payment account, right, that is fully open online. I think you remember. I think we had the record of account opening in terms of speed. You can do pretty much everything you can do on the from the payments and everyday banking side, right? You can initiate virement. You can now order cards. You can make payment by cards. But we go a little bit further, where a lot of providers stops. One is we have payment links, right? So that enables any businesses or freelancers to just get paid, right? So very basics. Besides just having money out, is getting money in. Then we have also the ability to create and generate invoices, right? Which is it exists, right? There's providers that do that, but the idea of doing that from your payment accounts into one place is something that we haven't really seen before. Combining that with a payment link, right, is something. So what else? We have the whole expense management side of things. So with the cards coming up, we'll be able to distribute multiple cards, to people you work with, your employees, your co-founder, right? I mean, think about your experience managing receipts. I don't know how, you paid for your flight coming in, but typically quite often it's paid on the personal side and people keep receipts. So that expense management side of things. What else? And now we are investing a lot around integrations, right? So what we realize is that a lot, and tell me if I'm wrong, but a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, especially in the era of cloud, use 5-6 different tools to manage their finance, right? They have cloud now to do sort of the intelligence. They have maybe Odoo to manage their ERP. They have a relationship with the payment providers like VPS or Stripe, right? So the idea really to sort of build this connectivity to all these tools is something we really see a lot of value in, right? So for now, it's very light integration, but we are heavily investing into understanding who are the tools that make sense and how do we, enable a seamless experience between all these tools.
I watched your podcast episode on Next Wave, and the two main things that were super interesting for me are first the payment link one, and the second is the online option of opening a bank, right? I think this is the case for me and the case of for a lot of Moroccan entrepreneurs or African entrepreneurs, is that when you offer a service to clients around the world, you get stuck at that problem of how can I get paid from these clients? And usually a wire transfer is one of the biggest red flags for these clients. Their banks are going to be asking them questions. And so they prefer to pay through payment links, like Stripe, for example, the option that they provide. And I remember 3 years ago, I was like, okay, let me do Stripe. And then you realize that your country is not supported by these payment processors. And so then you start looking for, ways to go around it, create an LLC in the US or somewhere else, and then do all of these things just for you to be able to get paid from clients abroad. And so that's why I really think the solution that you're providing here, I know that payment links is only one, but it changes a lot for entrepreneurs on the continent.
No. Look, I must be careful in the usage of the words bank because just from like a regulatory standpoint, we are not. I don't know if you use Mercury. You mentioned you use Mercury. Have you tried Mercury?
Yep.
Mercury always had these huge disclaimers that says Mercury is not a bank and so on. So I must use my disclaimer as well that we are typically an agent of a payment provider, right? Which is Chari Money here, which basically covers us in terms of licenses and enable us to offer a payment account that feels like a bank account, right? The money is safeguarded just like a bank account. But voila. But so after this disclaimer, typically, no, indeed, look, the funny part around payment links is that it was part of the roadmap. It wasn't something we were, prioritizing per se, just because we come from like digital banking and fintech side of things, but we don't come from what we call the acquiring side. Acquiring means like acquiring money, right? Which is typically when you call Stripe, for example, it's a very particular business. It's like you're not moving money out, but you're moving money in. You have to identify who the sender is. You have to make sure that there's communication between the two banks, and so on. It's a business on its own, right? It's like I tell you, buy now, pay later. So all that to tell you that it was in the roadmap, but typically we took a bit longer to really finalize the card piece of it and expense management side of it. So in the meantime, we launched payment links, and this is where we realize everything you're saying is that in Morocco the choice is still very limited. What happened is that they end up, and you hear the craziest stories because Moroccans are built this way. I think they always find ways to get something done, right? They're very practical. And so if you tell them you can't do that, they'll find a way, as you said, if they have to open a subsidiary somewhere in the UK, if they used to use crypto, they're gonna find a way to get that money in and out of somehow, right? So which worked for them, but essentially it's a headache, it's an admin headache, and essentially you always have fees down the line, and this is where we realized that even payment links became a major hook for us, meaning that great way for people to get into the platform. Now, are we as competitive as Stripe, right, which does this as a core business? Right, or even someone like Payzone here in Morocco. That's what they do for a long time, right? So if you want really truly end-to-end subscription and so on online, that's their core business, right? For us, it's an adjacent brick or modules to it that we do quite well. That is sufficient for a lot of people, but it was definitely an interesting story. And as you said, the ability to open some types of account abroad is something that is not just particular to Morocco. It was the biggest pain point to most of the banks. This was the first hook of Mercury actually in the US. Like the first, as part of the MVP or MLP as they call it, minimal lovable products. They have some very basic stuff, accounts, payments, in and out. But one of their key features when they launched was the ability to open accounts for foreigners. So essentially now it's been a bit more normalized in the US, but indeed in a lot of countries in Africa, it's for the right reason, so to say, that it was always a regulatory and compliance standpoint. But we think that today there's enough tools and methods to identify someone for instead of having him come to a branch, right? And I mean, you're Moroccan, right? You you have your documents and so on. Why would you need to in the 21st century to come and meet an agent? So
yeah, that makes sense. And I think especially for Morocco, because we have a large MRE, les émirats abroad,
exactly,
who come back and they want to open businesses. I mean, just for me, I was in Japan when I saw your podcast, and the whole reason why I booked my flight to come to Morocco for a week is to open a bank account for the company. And then I was like, okay, this is perfect. So there is actually no solution for businesses to open accounts, because I know for my personal bank accounts, I was able to do it online. But I think Zazu is literally the only service provider that offers this option.
Yeah, is that the moment where I talk bad about the alternatives out there? No. I think it's just like South Africa. Actually, you mentioned that you have experience in Africa. The reality is, I think most of them you well, I don't know as an MRE, I don't know, but most of them I think you can do a lot online. But it's a lot that I'm not always clear on, because as also a foreign national, a foreigner, I had to open accounts both in South Africa and here in Morocco. And typically, yes, you do 50, 60, 70%, 80% of the flow, but there's always a 20% what you have that screen, and I can show it to you in every possible bank that I know that says, please contact an agent or please show at the branch, right? So it is digital, but not really. So, and eventually, man, the number of time, I'll just take South Africa in this case, but the number of time where I never got that call from that agent. So my account is not open. As far as I know, right, from when it comes to a business, or pro account perspective, with the idea of having a bit more than just an account where you can make payment in and out, I think we are one of the few ones, I would think. I think there are payment providers that do that well, as I said. I mentioned some of them. I think there are banks. I think there are people now that are doing, I don't know, micro loans and things like this, but sort of a holistic, call it operating system, not that I know of. And as you said, the MRE you're the example of it, right? Simo from Next Wave is also an example of it. These are guys like you guys. You come from Morocco. You building your experience abroad, and typically what we see is these guys. Correct me if I'm wrong. You were using Mercury, or who were you using?
Yeah,
Mercury. So it's the easiest sell from our perspective, because they are used to a modern experience, to something that feels like instant, that feels like intuitive, and so on. So they come back, right? And sometimes they're looking for a similar alternative. They say Stripe. Where is Wise? Where is Mercury? Right? And this is what we this is what we want to the flag we want to hold here, is to say, look, there are alternatives now, Moroccan made, if you will, or Moroccan specific, that can exist.
I remember I jumped on a call with you when I was trying to open my Zazu accounts. And I have to say, from Japan, I have to say I was surprised, because I was filling in my information. I thought it would just let me in immediately, or it would ask me to wait 72 hours to get the account opened. But the next step was to actually book a call with you, which I've never seen in a financial service provider. So I was like, okay, let me try the one that's in 20 minutes. There's a very low chance that you're going to show up, because it's like last minute. And you actually showed up in 20 minutes.
People are always surprised. Yeah. And what time was it at the night, It's like late or something, no?
Yeah, it was like, I think 10 p.m. or something. I was like, I'm just going to try right now, because everything else was during my 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. And so you showed up. We had a great call. And then we moved to the next step, which was actually getting my account verified. Can you explain what documents do businesses need to open an account with you guys? And how long does it typically take for the account to be open? Because I know our case, like you said, we had like a time record. It was in 1 hour and a half, which was amazing, mind-blowing. So what documents do people need?
Yeah. So just to piggyback on your first part, is we intentionally try to book demos for two reasons. One, we want we're still in the launch phase, right? So therefore we want to make sure that we have the right customers. We could go after the numbers, right? We could tomorrow, I don't know, put a marketing budget, but is it really worth having 100,000 of customers that are not active and that are not really co-building that product with us? Not really. So we'd rather have a handful, but people that understand what we're doing, and that we can co-build and we can have these interactive sessions with. One. Two, it's almost like you doing us a favor, because when I open the account with you, or when I help you guide you through some of the process, I can see where, how you're using the onboarding flow, where you stuck, what are the questions. And this was very important in Morocco, because Morocco was still a new market for us, right? As you say, a lot of these solutions are new. So we that enables us, beyond AI, of course, you can do stats and see where people stops and drop. But I can see your people's hesitation. Why are you asking me this information? Why are they dropping? Why are they not feeling comfortable continuing? Right. So this is very insightful for us to really refine the onboarding flow and learn on to what you expect and so on. Right. So and to create these relationships eventually, because I think you might have referred someone, but eventually we are at that stage now where people are so happy with at least pleased and surprised positively with the experience that they bring us people. They say like, look, we're doing a podcast now. So what they need typically, so there are multiple paths, but the first one is there's three paths. Either you don't have a business, okay, and then typically you will get at some point you will reach a point where we'll ask you, do you have business documentation? And if you don't, we are now working with providers like Legal Plus, for example, here in Morocco. That's basically just do that. They will create, if you want a SARLO, SIRL, they will, we basically redirect you to them. And then now we're also working on record speeds, but the last one we had was 7 days. In 7 days, basically, someone that didn't have a business created this whole documentation through Legal Plus, get their whole trade registry and so on, and then they come back to us and they can open an account, right? So that's scenario one. Say a week, right? You have no documentation, you come back to us, and depending on what you want, you have you are considered a business to us. The second one is auto-entrepreneur, right? So you have a big part of it in Morocco, right? They are either sole traders, or they want to be bigger business, but it's that sort of transition phase. Typically, we just need a certificate of auto-entrepreneur. That's it. It's as simple as that. And so that's for the identification of the business. Then we need their CIN or some types of personal identification to make sure that they are who they say they are. And then the third way is basically SARLO, SIRL, any types of typical business entity. And typically these guys they also need typically the registry of commerce, right? The RC, as we call the model J or model 7, I think, right? That enables us to understand who are the gérants, right? Then the second piece is we need the status. Okay, who are the shareholders, right? Because that's part of our regulatory requirements. Is we need to understand who are the ultimate beneficial owner behind the funds. And then basically we need the CIN of all the gérants, right? Just to make sure that same thing, we do a KYC, it's typical of the bank. How long it takes? So after that, once that whole process as you did was online, right? It's if you have all your documents, they're clean, they're updated, and so on. This can be within the same day, right? We have record speeds because we have a team that just does that. Just make sure that typically it goes through our team that makes sure the documents are right, they are dated, that you have that information that you said about the gérant are accurate. We matches that with the local registry of commerce, right? And then typically after that, it goes to our partner, licensed partner that also needs to give their go, right? Because otherwise, imagine we start opening business right and left. So they need to make sure that we're compliant and they give the final go, and then we can open the account. Typically, best case can be within the day, a few hours, right? If everything is clean, that's what we see with the MRO, like these guys are like on top of their documentation. They're like the first of the class. And then people that may have either an outdated register of commerce, or instead of the status, they give us whatever, another document. And we need to either, chase them. Now we are putting these automations in. It can go as far as 2 days, 3 days, depending on when they come back, right? But it's less so on our side. It's more like the time that they come back. There are a few exceptions, maybe when you have a really complicated cap table and structure. Like if some of the beneficial holders are funds, which either is owned by a fund, and then eventually you need to do a bit of digging. But I would say average 1 to 2 days.
Okay, so you mentioned that you have a team that's dedicated to just that part of the business. And I'm curious, what does the Zazu team looks like at the moment?
Yeah.
And if you can add, who was your first hire?
Good question, actually. Who was the first hire? I will tell you. So what is the team? How many people are we now? Close to 15, I think, altogether. All the way from the founders to engineering and products to now operations. And we're starting now a bit of marketing. And so first hire, who is the first hire? Good question. I know who the first hire was. The first hire, was our CTO, actually. Was our CTO, which is almost part of the founding team, right? Because he was in early. because at some point, my co-founder Rince is definitely the more technical guy out of me. He can talk product, he can talk tech. He sold, his web hosting business back then and so on, and he's a product guy, but he's not the one coding, right? So quite quickly we had our CTO as someone we worked with in our previous company, and these guys, it was his bread and butter to build core banking systems, to build these products that are that feels new, but for him it's like he's been doing that for the past 10 years. So that was our first hire, and the second first hire per se officially was our GM back then for South Africa, and the reason was that what we always knew that we tech, building a fintech or whatever digital business accounts we can do anywhere, that we know, we come from that world. But what is harder to do, and you see that in Morocco, anywhere, and it's very country specific. You need the right ties. You need to be able to interface with the regulator. You need to open the right doors, right? So that's why the first hire was a guy. His name was Neil. He was typically he had 30 years of experience, at least I think 20, 30 years of experience in the banking for Bidvest Bank, which is, I don't know, the equivalent of Chari or Seyash in South Africa. And these guys enabled us to negotiate regulators' approval, to get the right partnership with the bank in terms of security and licenses, and really help us navigate the local regulatory framework. Voilà. So that was the first hire. So today, in terms of team, so we have the founders, CTO. We have, I think, 4 to 5 engineers. We have for each market now we have a GM, right? As I said, one in South Africa, one in Morocco. That typically it's like they're typically very experienced guys, if I may say. These guys know where to pull the right ties with the right people, make the right phone call at the right time if we need to. And now we're starting to have UX designers, right? To now making the product a little bit cleaner, and people around growth and marketing. And we have 2 people when it comes to operations, right? So as I said, they're doing like KYC, compliance verification, and so on, right? And so I must add as well, if you want to be fully transparent, we have at least 3 or 4 AI agents. I don't know if you count them as employees, but we must at some point.
Definitely, yeah.
Some of them are doing customer supports. The first line of actually, if you ask a question on the chat, and we're seeing it now, like quite a few answers gets like fully answered and resolved by an AI agent. Yeah, it's quite impressive. We have one called Yassine, who's doing growth. She's reaching out. She will find you actually. She'll say, Yassine, actually, I saw that you're in MRE. You come back quite often. She'll find you some way, somehow. And she'll have a discussion with you on emails or on LinkedIn or WhatsApp, right? Today you have enough tools to find you and to tell you like, Yassine, are you looking for, I saw that you have, an e-commerce online. I see that you have activities on Instagram. How is your payment solution looking like? Then you interact, and then she comes back, and then she booked that demo with me, which is crazy.
Wow.
It's very crazy. And
I think Yassine was the one I saw the post about.
Exactly. No, it's very crazy because I go on calls, right, with people that I don't know, right? And not only, they tell me like, well, I had a chat with Yassine actually, and like it's a normal person. And on top of that, the timing is right. Like they're telling me, actually, funny enough, we were looking for a new provider for this, and I'm like, wow, that is. So we have Yassine, we have that, customer support, Yassine, and I know we're building a new one. We're building a few other ones across different stream, but no, it's interesting.
That's super interesting. And you mentioned how important ties are and having the right network in the markets where you're going to operate. And in Morocco, I know that you guys collaborate or work directly with Chari.
Yeah, correct.
So how did the partnership come? How did you meet? I'm assuming you met Ismail Belkhayat, or how did that whole thing go?
Yeah, well, he met us. I don't know. No. How did that work out? So typically, well, funny enough, I was always looking at the African markets already back then when I was working in Europe. But I don't know, it's my origin, my Tunisian origin. I don't know. I was always curious also around financial inclusion and things like this. Anyway, don't want to go down the path, but I always had an eye, and I had noticed Chari and what they were doing. When we were in South Africa launching, we got in touch with Ismail. I don't remember. I think because of our similar network, right? And there was 2 touch points that were interesting for us. There was multiple touch points. But the first one is he started to launch his BaaS, banking as a service, right? And we came from that world, right? So there was a lot of insights that we were willing to share and so on, and help him in that direction. Vice versa, he really liked the story around Zazu and the entrepreneurship acumen. So he was one of our first angel investor, actually, right? So aside from Morocco, there was no intent just yet to step into Morocco. And eventually things sort of fall out in place where, he built his BaaS quite quickly. He gets one of the first license to actually operate as a payment or banking infrastructure player in Morocco. And in the meantime, we were ready to step into new markets, and we always eyed somehow Morocco, right? We weren't sure about the timing and so on, but the stars aligned and we're like, look, literally maybe 9 months ago or so, a bit more, I stepped into, we came to see Ismail. We said, okay, what's up? How is Morocco looking? We said, look, we are ready to go. So it took us maybe a few weeks to integrate, right? To take exactly not exactly, but at least in terms of functionality, really bring most of the stack, fine tune a few things like payment links, like things that are Moroccan specific. And we were live, right? And then that's where we started now, bringing a GM and really investing into the local markets. But I think there was a lot of synergies in terms of willingness to do fintech on the continent, right? And willingness to put pieces of things together, right? He had a license on one side, he had the market knowledge, and he had something already running. And we had basically also a product that was ready to scale.
I love that. And I think there's this notion is that whenever a Moroccan entrepreneur wants to start something that's fintech related, they have this notion that it's impossible. Bank Al Maghrib wouldn't let you move forward with that. What kind of comments would you give on that, given your experience with collaborating with local partners and making this work? And what kind of advice would you give to someone who has a fintech idea and wants to do it from Morocco?
Yeah, no, actually, as I said, right, coming from Tunisia, I was always watching, also eyeing the Tunisian market. And that was the biggest blocker for me. And I think it's still the biggest blocker is that, in Tunisia, I met some great people from Tunisia that these guys have studied abroad and so on. And they came back to build in Tunisia. And it took them 6 years for something that could have been done in 1 year because they couldn't get around the regulation and the regulator. If the regulator had decided that was it. And so we were a bit skeptical also in general, countries that we didn't know how they would perceive this. But quite the opposite. So far, I think the Bank Al Maghrib has shown in the past few years, right, that clear mandates, that they want to see innovation, that they want to support new players, that they want to support also tech-friendly regulations. So far, at least it's been quite clear. I mean, most of it is directed by a partner, Chari, because they are the one who holds the license, interface with the regulator. So I would, my comments would be that I think it's don't be afraid. I think communicate, right? Whether it's through a partner that you want to use like Chari, or I think they have multiple working team now that the Bank Al Maghrib that is quite. You can write them. I think they'll answer. So I would only encourage you to go in that direction, to either work with the partners that already has done it or has a license and has already things figured out, or at least have conversation. But as far as we've seen, it's quite encouraging. Even though obviously it's regulation is never the funniest part of but it's a must, right? And it's done once you understand it's done for the right things, for the ecosystem is a good thing. So. And I think one last comment on this, I think that's why all the lights are on Morocco now. We had an event. I speak daily with investors. I was speaking with an investor now as well that says, I ask him, where do you see the activity happening? And Morocco often comes in, not because people are friendly, they are friendly, but because I think the regulator has understood this, that if they want to make it a true international hub, like it has the potential to be, it has to work with these new actors, and this is happening now. So, and this is why eventually talking about revolutes, right? This is what out of all the countries they could have chosen, they chose Morocco as one of their first markets. Now we'll see how it would look like, but yeah, I think it's quite positive.
What do you think the main difference is, given that you had experience in both South Africa and Morocco? What do you think the main differences are when it comes to the fintech market?
Typically, the idea of giving out new licenses and opening up the market to new competitor, which is something it's not easy to do because the regulator has a mandate to do innovation, that's for sure, but it also has a mandate to protect the banks and the entities to do so because they are a major part of the economy, right? Imagine if, and that's, I think, look, I don't know the discussion with Revolut and so on, but I'm assuming, when you have a major actors that have done so much damages not damage in a negative way, but you got to be careful in how you let such a player come in. So in terms of difference, I think, so because Europe and the UK, for whatever reason, I don't know, the regulator woke up one day and said, you know what, let's enable these new licenses. They did two things actually. They said, you know what, let's enable these new licenses. Puff, Revolut came about, right? That was the birth of the Revoluts, the Monzo and these big names and the Wise and so on. And then the second one was they forced the banks to open up their data, to say like, look, if there's a customer that wants to move his data from, I don't know, BNP Paribas to, or Barclays to this provider, to Zazu, or share it, right? For whatever use case, you must do it, right? So they enable that new players to come about, to be born, and also this interoperability with the system. So therefore, that has led, I think, a lot of European markets to develop quite fast, to have competition, to have alternatives. Today is, if you have lived in Europe or many parts of the world, it's as you said, Wise is normal. Like young people have it, Stripe is normal, right? So I think they're a bit more. In the world is not advanced, but they're more familiar with these types of alternatives. One, two, I think they're a bit more open to new solution in the sense that I can see Moroccans are, again, for the right reason and historical reasons, they are very cautious. And that's why I spend a lot of time on the onboarding and seeing is they're willing to give their data, but they want to understand where this is going, where the funds are going, and rightfully so. So they're a bit more cautious. And lastly, what are the differences? I think they are much more, Africans and Moroccans specifically are much more practical. As we said earlier, it's a very practical, people are very practical and they don't think, they don't really, UX, UI is important, right? But it's not the main priority. It's priority number 3, 4. If it's nice, that's okay. But does it work? Does it get my things done from A to B at the end of the day? That's what they get. While I think in Europe and so on, they sometimes, and I'm guilty of it as well as a consumer, is because you have more choice, you have the luxury to say, you know what, this one is I prefer N26 because it's shinier or because their card is transparent. You know what I mean? Really, there's that type of conversation. So I think I think for me, Moroccans are much more practical. They are much more aware and cautious of adopting new solutions because it's new. I think that's the and they are getting accustomed to the new solutions, right?
And something else I'm very curious about is, what is it like to run a startup with a co-founder or co-founders?
Well, no, it's great, to be honest. We were having this discussion a few days ago. We call them founders nights, where we typically get in a room and then we discuss about topics specifically that are relevant for founders. And then this discussion came about like sole founders versus multiple founders, especially in the world of AI, where, as I said, right, you can build, if you want to, don't know about the technical co-founders, but you can do quite a lot with AI, right? I would never be able to have gotten started nor to keep the business running without a co-founder. Like, honestly, we have very, very complementary skills. We were talking about it also, me and him, this morning, actually, because we have very different ways to look at the product. He looks at it from a very practical perspective. Like for him is UX, UI, whether this is the button is there, it doesn't matter. It's like, can I get this done and quite quickly? And for me, I'm very, very detail oriented, and the experience matter almost not more, but as much as, so we were joking. I was like, you're probably an Audi kind of guy, and I'm probably like a Maserati. But the point is that we're very complementary in how we build and how we do things. One, two, look, entrepreneurship is very hard. I don't know. I have a few friends that did it alone, but didn't go through eventually because it's tough. So I can really see that there are weeks where, I'm like, man, fire, let's go, let's do it. And he's a bit more like tired or has fatigue or, a moral down for whatever reason. And vice versa. When I'm down, then he's the one pushing. So that's the second thing. And the last thing, I think, back to complementary skills is We're also very complementary in terms of dynamics, meaning like, for example, when we speak to investors or even certain clients, like bigger accounts, like we discussed some of the names earlier, where, I'm very good at creating that relationship and being there on those first calls and so on. And then he's very good also when a contract needs to be signed and he needs to bring that, he was my boss and manager
Oh,
of his
wow.
company. So he has a bit more seniority in that sense, in many regards so I think it's a good combo. I'm very much the guy on the ground, right? That I have this conversation, and he's the guy when you need to bring that seniority and close a contract or an investment and so on. He's much more calm and much more wise, I would say, as me being more emotional and yeah.
Every fintech company, there's this moment where it almost dies. Was that the case also for Zazu? And what saved it?
The toughest part was, I think, getting started, because nobody trusted us people trusted us because of our backgrounds, but not the legitimacy to build something in Morocco or in South Africa, right? They're like, well, what do you know about South Africa? Well, for us, we looked at it the other way around. It's like, well, exactly. Like we're looking at it with fresh eyes. So I think in terms of, at some point in the early days, getting that first funding was very tough. And this is why actually we went to essentially, we turned out to go to our network, people we had worked with. And for them, it was evident. We didn't have much discussion. It was like, look, here's a check, go run with it. We trust you. And this was our first sort of wave of getting going. And then eventually investors came in. But that was one. Two, we had some lapse of times in South Africa, because the reality is we didn't have a Chari equivalent in South Africa. Therefore, we were dealing directly with the banks. Here, Chari is doing that, lot of that work for us. But because we were dealing with the banks directly, there's lots of politics sometimes in the bank. Sometimes they take time, and so we took very long to get to markets, which is the time is number one thing as an entrepreneur. So no, I think now we are in good positions where we have enough. I think there's two things. We have enough resilience. We've built that resilience because we tasted that, being close to probably giving up and so on. Like, we don't want to go back to that. We're not going back there. So we're very aware. I think a lot of sometimes founders think because we have raised money, like they wonder, like, but why you don't spend on this? Why don't you do just a podcast? Because we come from that. We're very aware of, we don't want to go back in there. So we're very cautious into, and I think that's a good thing. I think now we have enough momentum. Right. Of course, we build things, we break things. That's a startup, but we have enough ammunition of clients we're signing, positive things to say, partnerships we're building to sort of build on that continuously now. So I don't think obviously things can change, and once again, this is why, back to what you said, we're trying to stay close to the customers, because the moment you stop talking to customers is the moment you become like the legacy players that have stopped caring. Right. So, and sorry, one last thing for me that is very important is there's one of our very first customers that I remember. Basically, this guy, just like you, he came. He studied onboarding online. Actually, I didn't interact with him because I saw him coming in the system. He opened his account by himself. And typically what happened, I think he got stuck somewhere in the process. It was one of our very first accounts, right? So he talks to the customer service team and he's complaining right away. It's like, it's not going fast enough. His account was open in like less than a day, but the guy was already complaining. And eventually the customer service team tells me, look, this guy is complaining, right? So I call him, right? Literally less than a day. I say, hey, just what's happening? I want to hear it, right? And we want to do better. Well, you guys are not responding fast enough. I said, what are you talking about? It's been half a day. We open your account and you have the founder calling you. But the message here is that this guy turned out to be one of the most active and one of the early birds that I want to listen the most from. Because even if it's tough, there is always a part of uncomfortable truth that I hear from him. Like sometimes I meet the guy for coffee in like Friday night and I'm like tired as an entrepreneur. And the guy adds to my best. He's like, well, you guys didn't develop this isn't working. But man, at the end of the day, if you can read through these things, there's a lot of insights for us. So maybe not a phase where we faced downtime, but this is part of the tough times that, enable us to eventually be in a better place.
And I think that's one of the best pieces of advice even for other founders is to not only take feedback that's only like good or it makes you feel good about your company,
Yeah.
but also the bad ones that don't make sense and try and see
Yeah.
what's actually in there.
Definitely. I think you also don't want to, you have to be careful, right? Because you'll have nares, right? You'll have people that tell you no, that bring you down, and you got to be careful. But you must also, the toughest feedback are the best ones. And essentially the exercise is almost, I'm not going to say easy, but you just need to listen, right? And they'll tell you, like, man, this doesn't work. I hate this from my bank. I'm from that. You just list them. And you just, it sounds easy, right? But you just need to take these three things he's complaining about, fix them. And trust me, you have at least 100,000 guys like him that needs this. I spoke with the few, and I think this will turn into a piece of advice that I would recommend, is that I spoke to a few entrepreneurs, right, that saw me doing these demos and speaking to customers, and they told me, but man, why don't you get your team doing that, And they're right, like this is not always a scalable process. But man, as a founders, you need to get your hand dirty. You need to get to hear and speak to customers directly. I think a lot of founders too early want to build a team, want to set up a marketing team, wants to get sales guys to take care of it. And for us, that has become very a strength because it's enabled us to really stay close, to hear what works, what doesn't. And eventually, once you get these 50, 100 first customers and you hear from them, after it's much easier, then you can start automating things. But so I would really encourage people to go and get your hand dirty.
And so, Germain, where do you see Zazu in the next 5 years, both in Morocco and globally?
Yeah, well, ideally, we want to be a major player when it comes to SME finances, right? So, as one of the main operating system. So instead of in definitely those two markets, South Africa and Morocco, where instead of you using Stripe, Wise, whatever, Xero, Odoo, and so on, you use Zazu to manage. It could be on top of an existing account. There's no problem with that. But at least to manage as a system, right? We want to be that main operating system for all SMEs across Morocco and South Africa. And then beyond that, right? So two things. From a product perspective, we want to start stepping into things that goes beyond just the simple everyday banking stuff like international remittance, lending, right? Whatever, insurance, things that are a bit. Doesn't mean that we have to do it ourselves, right? We are, exploring and discussing with the banks to do it, but we want to go beyond just the ERP or tools. And the second piece is quite quickly, indeed, we want to be able to be in multiple markets, right? So whether be it Tunisia, Francophone Africa, or Egypt, and vice versa in Sub-Saharan Africa, so that we can enable guys like you or startups that are building cross borders now, because that's people are starting to think beyond Morocco, that we can accompany them as their primary operating system, and then we can enable these remittances between these countries. That's where and maybe let's reach the million customers maybe in the next 2 to 3 years. That would be good.
I definitely think you're going to reach that goal. I got access to your roadmap, and the services and the things you have on there are just amazing. But yeah, thank you so much for making the time for today's podcast. My last question would be, which entrepreneur or founder would you like to see on this podcast?
Look, I think Ismail Belriat and the co-founder Sophia are a great example of pioneers, in Morocco for sure, and what they're doing now in finance. They're very accessible, and I think they have lots to say around, being practical, but also, also dealing with regulation now. So I would say that's one of them. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that I see in Morocco now. I like the guys from Sal Finance. His name is Mohamed. Basically, these guys are aggregating all the different APIs and systems from the banks into one thing. So we're closely looking at that. What else? Man, there's plenty of people. That's it, I think. No, there are too many. But these are the first ones that come into mind. They are doing very interesting things.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Cool. No, thank you, Yassine. We appreciate it.